At the time of the Oklahoma run, William Henry's son Clarence was 18 years old. He helped construct the combination dugout and sod house for the family to live in. A year later, the Arnolds moved into a house built from lumber. In the harvest time, Clarence would sometimes work at neighboring farms to earn extra money. Before too long, he had the means to become a little more fortunate than his peers and was able to buy his own saddle horse, back in the days when there still were no cars. And he later bought a buggy to go with it. Back in the days without television, the big entertainment was meeting at friends' houses for what they called literaries. Young people would pick up their friends in a wagon or a buggy and congregate at a home and play games, sing songs, play various instruments, speak pieces, etc. Occasionally, dances were held at the local schoolhouses. It was at one of the dances, or literaries, at the Cheney Dell Schoolhouse that Clarence met Noynetta Cheney, who he later courted and then married on September 25, 1897 in Enid, Oklahoma. Noynetta, or Noy, was 20 years old when they married. She was born in a town called Flat Gap near Knoxville, Tennessee. She was the ninth of 12 children and did not wear shoes for the first several years of her life. Her father, Henry, was an unlicensed doctor and justice of the peace for a time in Tennessee. When Noy was 6, Henry moved the family to Kansas. And in 1889, Henry sent his family back to Tennessee, saying he would join them in 3 weeks. However, he never returned and sent notice that he was divorcing his wife, Mary Ann. But the pioneer spirit burned brightly in Mary Ann Gass, whose grandparents had settled Kentucky and housed the Daniel Boone family after the Boone's cabin was burned. But we'll save that story for the rest of the family history. This one's about the Arnolds. Well, a year after that divorce, Noy's mom, Mary Ann Cheney, took her 6 younger children and returned to Kansas. 2 years later, when Noy was 15, Mary Ann made the run into the Oklahoma Territory and built her own sod house on 160 acres. I had a chance to ask my grandfather, Cliff Arnold, a few questions about his father, Clarence, and he told me his father didn't have a lazy bone in his body. He also said that he had itchy feet. In other words, he couldn't sit still and was always moving the family around. In their first year of marriage, Clarence and Noynetta lived in a one-room log cabin on a 160-acre homestead near their parents' homesteads. The next year, Clarence and Noy drove several loads of hogs to Enid, Oklahoma, and made enough money to buy lumber for a 2-room frame house on their property. But Clarence didn't care much for farming, being mechanically inclined, so in 1898 he sold the homestead and he moved to Carlisle, Oklahoma, and he opened a hotel and a restaurant. A few months later he scrapped that plan and he ran a confectionery, a candy factory. Clarence then took over another restaurant, and then in the meantime he started learning the blacksmith trade, making horseshoes and tools and axles and such things.
He was a blacksmith originally, and he shoed horses. And then when the horse went away and the iron horse came, the car, he became a body mechanic. And, you know, my grandfather, remember, was the guy who had itchy feet and traveled everywhere. And you'd stay someplace a few years and move on, someplace a few years and move on.
In his spare time, he built another 2-room frame house for his wife and 2 children, Lee and Alta. 2 years later, in 1903, a railroad was built 4 miles away in Helena, Oklahoma, and since that was the new hotspot, Clarence hitched the house he had built to a team of horses and he dragged it over to Helena and set up a blacksmith shop there. That year, they had another son named Cliff, our direct ancestor, and later they had Clyde and Mabel. In 1907, word got out that things were happening in old Mexico, so Clarence got itchy feet again, and he moved the fam to Valles, Mexico, where they operated another restaurant and store, and they slept in a tent. Clarence hunted for wild hens and deer to feed the family. The challenging life in the near wilderness was exciting, but it was also very difficult. The river where they bathed and hauled their water was a mile away. The kids would get strange infections, and one night a tropical storm hit with a fury. The family was separated for a time in the middle of the night, and the settlement was left ankle-deep in water the next day. Noy decided she had had enough, and she loaded the 5 kids on a train back to Oklahoma to live with Grandma. 2 months later, Clarence joined them. A bunch of Indians in Oklahoma were planning to move to what looked like some more promising land in another part of Mexico, and Clarence started talking up that possibility. Don't think so. Within the year, the family decided to join 2 of Noy's brothers in Southern California. They packed all their belongings and they boarded a train to Compton, California, where Clarence worked as a blacksmith and carpenter and built the family another house, this one a story and a half high. They stayed there at least long enough to create their sixth child, Bill, who was born in 1910. A few months later, Itchy Feet was at it again. He bought a 10-acre ranch in Chinook, California, and moved the family there and, you guessed it, built another house to live in. They only lived there for the summer before they moved to San Gabriel for 1 year, and then to Alhambra, California for 1 month, as they prepared to move to Arizona, where he bought a 20-acre tract of raw desert land that had never before been cleared. This picture is on that Arizona property. They camped out while Clarence cleared the land. During the first year on the ranch, they killed 46 rattlesnakes. Later, they lived in a tent house, 3 feet of wood and the rest of it canvas. Their 7th child, Charlie, was born in that tent house in 1912. But the baby didn't do well in the difficult conditions and died 5 months later. He was buried in Mesa, Arizona. The ranch, they raised alfalfa, cotton, maize, melons, sweet potatoes, and planted a peach orchard. They won a prize at the state fair for a 15-pound sweet potato. One day, the dog grabbed Lee's ear and tore the outer rim off. Paul fit the ear together back again, and it healed without leaving any kind of scar. After 2 years, they built an adobe house and lived there 3 years before returning back to California. In their later years, Clarence and Noinetta lived in Santa Ana, part of Orange County, California, and that's part of the greater Los Angeles area.
Well, I remember my grandmother to be a very sweet and loving lady who worked very hard and served her family. The most amazing thing about my grandmother that I do remember is that she became a Christian when she was 72 or 73 years old. Also, my grandmother watched Jack MacArthur, John MacArthur's dad. He was one of the first guys to be on television. I remember my grandfather liked to play cribbage, and we played cribbage together, and he taught me how to play cribbage. And he was always kind to his grandchildren.
He loved his grandchildren, and he taught his grandchildren how to play cribbage. And in Grandma and Grandpa's home in Santa Ana, in one of the rooms, which I guess we would consider it a den, there was a nice fireplace. And next to the fireplace was a card table. And on the card table was the cribbage board and the cards, and usually the bowl of roasted peanuts. And it was there that he taught us how to play cribbage. And so Grandpa was very diligent, patient with us, and enjoyed playing with us. But they, like I mentioned, the peanuts, they grew the roasted peanuts right there, and then Grandma roasted them in the oven, and some great memories there.
I remember she used to put on these big dinners for the family when we would all got together. She put on the big dinners, and I remember we would go to the Cheney family reunion every year, and we'd get all the family together on the Cheney side and all the family together on the Arnold side, and maybe there would be one time my grandfather was very good with his hands, and he built my dad a boat out of wood and made a boat, and I remember we went and launched it at the bay at Newport, and had a great time. I remember my grandfather liked to fish. He took me fishing sometimes to the ocean, to the pier when I was there, and he would go down to the pier at Newport and fish off the Newport pier. I remember one time I called my grandfather the old man, and my dad jumped all over me and said, "He's not an old man, he's my father, so don't you ever say that name of mine. Don't you ever call my father that again." I remember that. So they had a respect for Clarence, a lot of respect. And